Welcome back to Capitol Review. I'm Haley Milon. President Donald Trump is in office for his second term. He won't only be watched for what he does here in the U.S., but also what he does on the foreign stage, too. DC News Now's Mark Hall talks with Dr. Todd Belt.
And joining us now is Dr. Todd Belt. He is the director of the Political Management Program at the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University. Dr. Belt, welcome back to Capitol Review.
Great to be with you again. Thanks for having me on.
As you know, President Trump finished his first week in office. A lot of his activity involved executive orders that impact us here at home. But let's talk about his foreign policy. The president, before he was sworn in, talked about the Panama Canal and Greenland. Your reaction to his stance?
Right. It's interesting that Greenland was something he was talking about quite a bit before the inauguration, but didn't make it into the speech. So we have to wonder if that's still part of it. But he was very aggressive on Panama and, talking about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. And this is in quite contrast with what he campaigned on. He mostly campaigned on domestic issues and immigration, of course, and also to a lesser extent crime. And those have been the majority of his decisions, his executive orders, I mean. The foreign policy, this expansionist foreign policy, I guess, is his Make America Great Again and America First agenda. But that's not what he talked about. This sort of smacks a little bit about of imperialism and expansion rather than just taking care of people at home.
Right now we have a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. How can the president utilize that to his advantage?
Well, certainly the president takes a lot of credit for that, and he likes to say that nothing would have happened if he were president. He has two real key figures here that I think he's going to delegate this assignment to of keeping peace in the Middle East, and that's Mike Huckabee and Elise Stefanik. Huckabee going to be the ambassador, and Stefanik, of course, the ambassador to the United Nations. Both of them are very pro-West Bank settler, and we saw Donald Trump reduce or remove the sanctions on West Bank settlers. He's obviously a very strong supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. Remember, he moved the capital to Jerusalem, and Netanyahu will be coming to the United States within the next month or so to discuss this. So the main concern is to keep the ceasefire going. It's a three-phase ceasefire, and we're only in phase one. This is not something that Donald Trump is particularly interested in. I think he's going to try to delegate it to those two people.
The president talked about tariffs that could impact Canada, China, Mexico. Where do you think that's going to go?
Well, that's right. And he said he was going to do this on day one, but now he's given a February 1st deadline. And just recently he's talking about putting tariffs on Russia to try to stop the war in Ukraine, although that probably wouldn't have much of an effect because the United States does not import many products from Russia. The sanctions that we already have are very stiff on Russian energy and on other international financial transactions. The tariff thing requires a study. It actually requires the United States government to assert that the president needs this authority for national security reasons. And so he has to put that together first before he uses this. I anticipate that he's trying to use it more as a bargaining chip in terms of securing better economic deals with foreign countries rather than actually following through with them, at least in the full effect that he wants.
Oh, Professor, how can the president improve our relationship with China, specifically with President Xi?
Right, it's very interesting that Donald Trump just reached out to Xi today, saying that he wanted their assistance in helping to broker a ceasefire in Ukraine and trying to wrap up the war there. Donald Trump hasn't talked much about China in terms of its geostrategic interests, in terms of the South China Sea, or in terms of Taiwan. Mostly it's been economic. Remember, he said he was going to give us a new economic deal in the first term. He never got that done. Biden administration was not able to get that done either, and they actually continued and in some cases expanded some of those tariffs. He's going to go back to the table with them and try to put something together.
Dr. Todd Belt, thank you so very much for joining us.